Hello, I'm glad to see you again. Most of the complicated things we had to do are completed. Now it's all about creating our database, putting information in it, making sure it's legit information, making sure it is secure, and yeah, that's what we'll be doing today. We're gonna be using MongoDB. Now, MongoDB was really just created initially as something you would use with JavaScript most of the time, but as time progressed, people expressed the need that they would like to use MongoDB with C#. So their team actually made a driver for that. They call it a driver. It's basically a DLL that you're going to be putting in your Unity project to use MongoDB. And to make it work with Unity is a bit of a struggle, to be honest. So what I did is that I took the version I had to make, I did the changes I had to make it work with Unity, and I've compiled our own DLL. So if you guys go in the description down below, you're going to be able to find a link. First link, description should be the first link. You're going to see it. And those are going to be the DLL that I will ask you to download for this to work. So basically, it's these two things over here. So MongoDB Beason DLL and also MongoDB driver, the DLL. If you guys need some more information about this, these DLL, you can head over to GitHub MongoDB. So that's the team MongoDB, and then the project is called MongoDB C# driver, and you can build it on your own. I actually followed the tutorial online. I don't have the link right now, but if you look up MongoDB compile for Unity, you will be able to find it. If you don't want to do that, the files are in the description down below, so I'll be copying that over to my server. This is not something that client will need. Client will never talk to the database itself, so it's always on the server. So in my server script folder, I will create another folder called database, and then on top of that, a new folder called plugins. And this one must be typed the exact same way as I type it. So capital P L U J I N S. I don't know English so much, but it has to be called plugins just like this, because if it's not called plugin, Unity will not read it. Now, if you've never really used DLL in Unity, what happened is if you want to have DLL in Unity, you need to put them in a folder that they call plugins. So Unity is going to scan its whole asset folder. If it finds one of the folder called plugin, it will include those as DLL. So as you can see here, those have been included not only because I can see them in there, but also because they will show up on the inspector on the right hand side. I think it's this side for you guys. It could be anywhere. It could be right here. It could be on the top level. It will work as long as the folder is called plugins, and you can have multiple of those. So if you guys want to make sure you keep your things ordered, that's also possible. I'll put mine inside of plugins here. Okay, now it's time for us to create a script that will be our gateway to the database. And this is what I'll be doing right now. I will call it mongo.cs. You could call it database.cs if it's something else, or if you plan on having multiple type of database, you can also just call it db.cs or something like that, and then do different iteration on it. Okay, so this mongo.cs, what does it need? It's not, I don't think it's going to need anything Unity related. So no modal behavior. We'll call it from somewhere else. So we'll instantiate it, say, from the server.cs. And let's have a look. So we're connecting to a Mongo database in this case, so we're going to need information about that database. Now, when you're connecting to a Mongo database, what you can use is what they call a connection URI, which is, it's a string that will contain a username, a password, an address for the database, and I think that's it actually. We're going to be using one of these, so private const string, and I'll call it Mongo underscore URI. And we'll fill in that information later once we have a database. We're also going to need a name for that database, so const string, and that's going to be my database name. You'll see this one will have to match what we input on our Mongo database client, but it's going to be quite simple, and I'll remind you once we get there. Now, to work with the Mongo C# driver, we have to play around with three classes. One called Mongo Client, the other one Mongo Server, and the other one called Mongo Database. So let's go ahead and declare those. You're going to see that we don't have access to any of those because, well, we've added the DLL, but we have not included namespace. So let's go ahead and highlight Mongo Client, control dot, and you'll see using MongoDB driver. That will work unless the DLL import has not been done correctly. And so maybe you didn't name the plugin folder correctly, or for some reason the files are not being recognized. But if you don't get the Mongo client, that's the reason. So we mentioned having Mongo client, a Mongo server, and also a Mongo database. I'll just call it DB in this case. What I will be doing now is that I will be creating a initialize function and also a shutdown function. So I'll try to initialize our database even though we don't have a URI and even though we don't have a database name. So we're going to have a look at what the errors are, and then we're going to go ahead and create our database. So let's have a look at our initialization function. So public void init. So what I have in mind is that I'll be doing a new MongoDB, and then I use that object to actually call initialize and also do all my database requests on it. As I mentioned, if you're doing an initialize, make sure you have also a shutdown. In case of the shutdown, what I think I'll be doing is, let's see, do we have a shutdown here? No. So I'll just put everything here on null. Server, this one has a shutdown, and database is also going to be equal to null. So that's going to be my shutdown. But we don't even have initialize just yet. So when it comes down to initializing, we have to start with the client. We create a new client, I believe, so yes, new Mongo client, and this one will take in the Mongo URI or Mongo URL here. There's even a class for that. We're going to be using a string. They also like to call it connection string. So that is our Mongo URI in our case. We now have our client. From this point, we do server client.getServer. And then we can get the database from there, I believe. So db is equal to server get database with the database name. Here we go. So we have the three fields we're going to need, and then at this point, this is where we would fill in the collection. So if you guys are not aware, in MongoDB they're called collection. They're like the equivalent of tables in SQL. However, we don't have defined fields, so you don't necessarily have to fill in all the fields. It can be like almost like a dynamic object. We'll see more of that in a second, but it is quite cool. Now, in terms of collection, we don't have anything in mind at the moment. We haven't created any table, we haven't created any collection. In fact, we don't even have a database. So we're going to be leaving this empty. However, I'll make sure to just do a debug.log just to know that these things are being called. Which means I'm going to have to include Unity engine for this one. So debug.log, and I'll just say database has been initialized. I don't know why I like that word so much. Here it is. Okay. Now, before I go and I create that database, I would like to call this code from somewhere else. In this case, I will be calling it from the initialize inside of server. So go all the way back to server.cs. We're going to be creating a new database object, which I'll be keeping track of right here. So private Mongo, and I'll just call it DB like this. Don't need anything else in that. I'll do DB is equal to a new Mongo and db.initialize, which will in turn try to initialize the database. Let's have a look at what kind of error we should be facing if we run into this. We don't have to start the client, only the server itself will run this code. Parameter name collection, so I'm actually not quite sure why it says that, to be honest. But it's definitely a problem that has to do with the initialization of our MongoDB. So probably it's looking for a collection that it can't find because it can't even find a database. So maybe this is not the best error. Maybe we could do a bug report on their Mongo, but we know what the error is, so let's go ahead and fix it. Right, so at this point, we're going to need to have a database somewhere. For the database, I am not going to be hosting it on my own machine. I'll actually be using an online database simply because I think it's going to be much easier to get started. It's going to be a lot less config, and we won't be touching at stuff that is kind of out of our scope. We're still going to do MongoDB, but we're going to be using a client online that I like quite a lot, that I'm not affiliated to at all, and that's free. That's the most important thing. So it's called mlab, mlab.com. That's all. Make sure it's HTTPS, and then create an account there, and you're going to see that you can create a lot of database. I have a lot of database that are just not related at all to this project. Actually, this one is. That's the last one I use. I'm actually going to delete it. But I'll show you how to create a database. It's fairly simple. So I really invite you to actually use those every time you have a MongoDB project that you're getting started with. If one day it gets serious and you need to actually go to a production environment and have multiple users, like you're not going to have enough size with this. So obviously you want to either look into their plan and pricing and pay for that, or host it on your own machine, which I would recommend the second option if you make it that far. But until then, this is a very good option right here. So when you want to create a database, don't click on this button, click on the one here at the top. I get confused all the time. And from here, you get to choose a couple of things. So I'll be using Amazon Web Services. I want the free version. Hit continue. I want to have mine on East Coast. Database name LLAPI. Remember, this one is going to be fairly important. We need to write it in the code. And just like that, submit order. 5 seconds and it is completed. It's right here. Okay. Here at the top you will find your Mongo URI. Actually, it's right here. And yeah, before we go any further, let's go into our code. I've copied over my database name. Here it is, LLAPI. Now in terms of the Mongo URI, you're going to notice right here, it's actually holding database user and also database password in between those quotation kind of. And we have to create a user to access the database. So let me go ahead, take this string, put it right here. And now you have to create a user. Now, users in database are mostly just for privilege, making sure the right people have the right privilege. So you could be creating a user that is just allowed to view stuff. You could be creating a user that's allowed to view and modify, which is going to be us in our case. Our server is going to be allowed to modify the database. It's really, user is just for permission, basically. So let's go under the user tab right here, add a new one. Database username, I'll be using N3K. My password 123. Don't try to connect, I'll have changed that by the time this goes out. Here it is, so N3K, password 123. Best password out there. You can see, database right here, read only is on false, so I'm also allowed to write and also to delete. And I'll go back in my code up here and change the database user for N3K. And the password for password 123. There it is. Now we have our connection URI. And just like that, things work. We don't have to do anything else than that. It just worked now, which is so cool, so fast. Let's press and play here, see if our error is still there. And it's not. Database has been initialized. Then we're listening to the rest of our application. So I was quite fast and I was quite successful. Amazing. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Actually, I already did. Are we going to stop here today? Of course not. We are going to keep on going. Got quite a lot of code to write here. And we're going to start by defining some regions. I like to have regions in here. One for finding, or fetch is a better word for this, when we're fetching stuff from the database. One could be for update. What else do we have? Do we have delete? We don't have delete in this case. Oh yeah, we do have a delete. Delete friend. So here it is. Our fetch, update, insert, and delete operation will be done on collections, or table if you want. So we gotta make sure we have those collections. And the problem here is, what kind of collection is it? What are we actually modifying? What is it that we're changing? What's the object behind this? And the cool thing with Mongo is that database doesn't really have to know, as long as your code knows, or it can go the other way around. So let me try to give you a proper example by going back in my code. Actually, my server here, I'm gonna be creating a new object right in here. So under the database folder, I'll create a new folder, call it model, and beneath that, new C# script, model underscore account. Not account, account, okay. There we go. Now, this model account is actually just going to be an object that's going to hold a couple of fields, and those fields will be what you'll see in the database. So I'm going to remove everything. I don't need any of that. And from here, I can now start defining what is going to be inside of my database object. Now it goes without saying that you can't put anything in there. I kind of lied. You cannot put vector3 because what the hell does MongoDB knows about vector3? Well, at least the Unity definition of it. The reason it has to be called _ID is because every time you create a new Mongo object, it will define itself a new ID. So it's a new object, it has a new ID defined by Mongo itself. And that field is called _ID, just like this. There is an exception to this rule. You can actually name it whatever you want. So you could say ID. But with a attribute on top of it, I think it's a bsin ID, I'm not quite sure, you can actually define what's going to be the field that will match that in database. Something like this. I am not quite sure. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I believe it is bsin ID written. Something like that. But yes. Oh, yeah, there it is. So that's the exception to the rule. I don't like using it, to be honest. I'd rather just have it the same exact way as it is in database. It's personal preference. And I might be wrong, like with the way I wrote that a second ago. So you might want to do a Google search if you're really planning on having a different name for that. It's not a problem for me, I'm just saying that. Okay, so back to our topic. What is it that we're going to keep on the account object? We're going to be keeping a couple of fields. I have a list here on my right, my left. First one is active connection. This is the connection ID that we get actually told by the server. I like to keep that, so if I find my account somewhere in database and I want to send him a message, I know he's online, I want to send him a message, I'll just have to use this active connection to send him a message from the server. Next up, we have a couple of strings. First one being the username. Second being the discriminator. So string discriminator. And then what do we have? We have the email, public string email. I haven't put the password in there. Let me do that. So public string. This one is going to be a SHA password, not just a password by itself. You don't keep plain text password in database. That's very important. You should know that by now. I bet you do actually. Next up, we have a public byte, and this one's going to be for the status. I like to keep this one as a byte, not a boolean, not anything like that. Status for me is going to be, are you online or are you not online? You could keep that in a simple on and off value. However, I like to keep it as a status, so I can turn it into a flag if I want. So assuming it's 0, it means the person is not connected at all. If it's 1, he could be connected in our first game. If it's 2, he could be connected in our second game. If it's 8, in our fourth game. So you see, I'll be using that as a flag to know, like, is he connected to the first and like the fourth one at the same time? You can play around with that. As long as status is not 0, then he's going to be online. You can assume that. But you can also use that byte to know how many games he's playing right now. He's active right now. Something I like to do. Next up, we have a public string for the token. Token is going to be used whenever we want to do an operation on behalf of this user. So the user is going to have to provide its token every time. Then we have, well, this one I don't really like. So it's a date time created on. So it's to know when exactly the account was created. Not data time, date time. But you know what? As a rule of thumb, it's like it's popular now to not keep data on people so much. Well, not anymore. So I'm not going to keep this one on. However, a little bit later on, I had also last login. So I'll keep the last login. I won't keep the created on. Simple reason here is I'm trying to avoid to keep data that we don't need. However, I want to show you how to save a date time as well. So we're going to keep at least one. So we don't need anything else in that. And I think we're actually ready to go and create ourselves a collection. Okay. Collection. Let's go back in our Mongo CS script. Inside of our Mongo.cs, I'll just put that beneath my 3 fields that I need. I'll do a private Mongo collection that I'll call accounts with an S. It's really important that you actually declare those right here. So right now it's a null value, but as soon as we initialize our database, going to say account is equal to db dot find collection. No, what is it? Oh, it's get collection. Get collection type of model account. So this is where our type actually comes in handy. And then you have to give out the name. So what is the name of our collection inside of the database? Something we don't have at the moment. But let's just assume we're going to call it account with no S. Okay. So everything should be completed in terms of our code. Now we're going to jump in MLab real quick. We're really, like, we don't have to be here really often. We're going to have to be here when we create our collection, create our user, and then if we want to view stuff, that's going to be great. But don't worry about me staying on this website for too long. Under collection, I'll do add collection, collection name, account. And see, that's what I like about Mongo that I really don't like about SQL. We're done creating a collection. We don't have to create tables. We don't have to define what is going to be the primary field. We don't have to do all that kind of stuff. We're just done, and the collection is going to accept what we'll give it. It's wonderful. Amazing. Alright, so we're going to be doing one last thing in this episode, and it's basically just testing out our flow. So to test out our flow, I'm going to use the insert section over here. I'm actually going to bump it up at the top. That's the one we'll be using the most. And we will create a function that we'll be using in the future as well. This function will be called insert hub account. So it's going to return a boolean, so I know whether or not it worked. And insert account, not hub account, my bad. That's my very, very old code. Yeah, we're going to insert an account. What does it require? It is going to require three things: username, password, or SHA password in this case, and also the email. That's all the information we need to insert. And then it might work or it might not work depending on multiple conditions we'll be defining quite soon, not in this episode, in the next one, such as, are you trying to create an account that already have this username? If that's the case, we're not going to create anything, return false, and whoever calls the insert account function will receive a false, so he'll know it didn't work. But right now, since we don't have those validation, we don't have these, here's what we'll be doing. We'll create a new object, model account. I'll call it new account. Let's just instantiate it to nothing. Then we'll say new account, username is equal to username, the one we're receiving parameter, new account, password, or SHA password is equal to this, and new account email, of course, equal to the email. So we fill in our three fields. Now there's a couple of other things in the account as well. As you guys realize, active connections not being set, discriminator not being set. In this case, it should be set. Let me just put that on 0, 0, 0. What else do we have in there? Status can remain on 0. We're not connected. We're just creating the account. And okay, so when we have our object, it's filling in with the information we want. We can go ahead and do an insert. How do we go about doing an insert? We actually have to grab the collection and then do the insert. So it has to know what it's going into, right? So here it is. Accounts, insert, new account. And I'll just return true if I make it that far. Okay, right now, no validation. No validation basically. So not the final code. However, it's going to be enough for us to test. So this is a public function. I'll be grabbing the name of this function in my clipboard. And let's say we're going to call it, just for testing purpose, we're going to call it right here. So test. And I'll say database, so DB, small letter, that's my instance, if you remember, my reference at least. We're going to insert account. The account name could be Bamboos. The password is Magnificent. And the email could be Vampire. Okay. Of course, as I mentioned, no validation. This is not a real email. But let's test this out. So, to actually know whether or not it worked, we're going to refresh our screen on the left hand side. So in MLab, I am refreshing my screen. So F5, Control F5 if you want. Accounts, document, 0. So there is no document in this. I'm going to go ahead and press on play on server, which we'll call initialize database, and then we'll eventually call insert hub account, or insert account. And we'll see. So we don't have any debug.log to let us know, but if I refresh over here, we have one document, and to view it, we have to click on it. So let's click on it. Here it is. This is the ID I was talking about. So this is automatically assigned. This is my grammar correction app because I don't know how to speak English. Active connection, 0. We did not assign that. Username, Bamboozle. Bamboos. Discriminator is that. Email. You know, that's our information. It's right there. So that works. Great. And yeah, that's actually where we're going to be ending this episode. So again, I'd like to remind everybody that if you need some help at any time, you can always comment in the description down below. But a place where I am much more active and I'd like to see you in there is this. Discord. It's filled with a lot of people right now. and people are speaking programming help. They give each other tips, and they just live together and are cool, right? Having that said, I'm quite happy you guys are tuning along this tutorial. I keep saying that every time, but it's something that I really think about, because the information about multiplayer is really scarce out there. When I was Googling stuff to learn about this, I would follow my old tutorial, which are just filled with crap. So yeah, if you guys enjoy this, if you enjoy that I put the time into making this, please leave a like, have a tea, leave some good comments. I'll see you in the next one.